So, good morning. Thanks for the invitation in what for me is a wonderful, beautiful landscape here. So I'm not used to having this kind of topography and the presence of the Gulf in my country. My country is partly a suburban country. And even if this is a nice building, I can recognize some of these suburban sprawl elements in your country as well when entering the city. So the comparison could be useful between my country, Belgium, and Estonia. On the other hand, I will be talking you mainly about Brussels, my city, which is a big city, which is indeed known for the European institutions. But I will try to explain you how we are working in Brussels to renewing the city, because you can't say that Brussels is a kind of exemplary city. In many cases, but I will explain you, it's also problematic. First thing, perhaps some elements about my job. So I'm the bouwmeester of Brussels, capital region, or in French, because it's a bilingual city, so the maître architect. It's something special. So in Belgium, we have, it's a tradition, young tradition, something like 20 years now. So the government, for the first time in Flanders and also in the city of Antwerp. I've been bouwmeester in the city of Antwerp for nearly 10 years. Then in 2009 in Brussels, then in Charleroi, French-speaking part of Belgium, in Ghent, and it's still indicated 2020 Wallonia. So that's when they announced they would be having a bouwmeester immediately, but they are still busy discussing whether to do it or not to do it. So it's a tradition. The bouwmeester tradition is something that was inspired by what is existing in the Netherlands, but which has been adopted in Belgium in a better way, I think. So we do better than the Netherlands. You should know also there is always this kind of rivalry between Belgium and the Netherlands, firstly in football, but also in the bouwmeester stuff, and there we have been winning. So the bouwmeester is not the head of the planning office, for instance. So the bouwmeester is also not dealing only with the projects of the city itself. So I'm also not deciding on building permits. I might be what is translated as the chief city architect, but it's not exactly the same. I'm also not just a consultant, and I'm also not a politician. So what is the bouwmeester? So the bouwmeester is an official. I'm working for the government and also appointed by the government, but working in an independent way. So you are recruited and you are paid to be critical. And why to be critical? Because the idea is to improve the quality of all urban projects. And if we're talking about quality, in the first sense, it's cultural quality. What you're building is for the future, is for the next generation. So it should be interesting. It should be the heritage of the future. Of course, we think about quality in a much broader sense, but this first element is really important. So the bouwmeester in Belgium and in Brussels is in charge of improving the quality of all urban developments in the city. Sometimes I'm saying we, because the bouwmeester is in fact a team of something like 15 people now. A bouwmeester is appointed per term of 5 years. So I'm doing it my second term in Brussels now. I don't think you should do a third term, because from time to time the bouwmeester has to change in order to bring a kind of fresh perspective and to keep and to remain independent. If you're too much in the system, after a while you lose your independence, and then it's time to move and there should be another one. The procedure to appoint a bouwmeester is an open call, public procedure, and so on. So I think you've understood. It's not about deciding. It's not about giving permits. It's not about hard power. It's about soft power. So we have to convince all of the time people. We have to convince the politicians to go in a certain direction. We have to convince private developers to make better projects. We discuss a lot. We build arguments. So all of the time it's about this kind of work. And that's where you get your power. I think this kind of soft power other ways of doing governance of urban projects in the city is quite important. So you need, of course, the basic things, good building permits, good administration, interesting politicians, and so on. But if you want to have really quality, then you have to add another layer. And this in Belgium is the Bouwmeester system, could be also in other countries. So we are ready to export the system if you're interested. And we've been discussing or investigating, in fact, on a European level, what are these kind of informal governance strategies? So what are soft power methods in other countries? So if we'll be doing a European research project, Horizon 2020, together with the Bartlett School of Planning in London and UN Habitat, the European office in Brussels, on tracing where in Europe do you have new kind of practices, other kind of practices that put some quality level on top of the normal system. So if you're interested, you could go to that website. What do we do in daily life? We have something like 3 pillars in our work. So 50% of our time is organizing competitions. Then we do research by design, I will explain you. And we also have a kind of classic system of design review mechanisms. Competitions. So we organize a lot of competitions because we think that's the main element in order to improve quality and also to have a kind of public debate on what is quality of architecture and what is the best proposal. So something like 1 competition a week, so quite a lot of them for a city like Brussels. We organize them in a fair way, so we have a set of rules. So the fee, for instance, for the architect is always fixed, so there is no competition on the fee. Architects are also, so the selection of, for instance, 5 architects who are invited for the competition, they're also paid for the competition. So the conditions are fair and correct. It's always a 2-step competition. The jury is professional, all these kind of things. We organize it for big projects, for small projects, so for kindergartens and so on. Also for, you could say, ordinary programs, like a recycling station, where you go to get rid of your waste. So I think also these kind of ordinary programs deserve good architecture. We also do it for a lot of productive economy. So in Brussels, we want to keep productive economy in the city, new economy, fab labs, innovating economy, but also ordinary jobs, like a place for a plumber. So that's why in Brussels, buildings are constructed especially for those kind of programs. And we organize competitions for it, because we think that those kind of programs, they deserve good architecture as well. We also organize competitions for private developers. So a lot of work is being done on that. Secondly, research by design. So in fact, I hate it when we are discussing on quality of architecture or quality of an urban plan, and we have just texts. Note for the decision of the government, these kind of important texts. Or we have Excel tables with the rentability and the square meters and the revenue that is supposed to come from it. But you can't build a city in Excel. So you need drawings, images, maps. So I want that these kind of things are on the table as well, because that's our tool. That's the way we express, we architects and urban planners, designers, express ourselves. So that should be recognized as also a medium that is important in decision making. And that's why in the team of the Bouwmeester we have 4 people who are drawing, who are making design proposals. Not to build them, because we don't want to build ourselves, not at all, and perhaps mostly the better architects are outside. That's why we organize the competitions, but we use the drawings to feed the debate, to show alternatives, to translate an Excel table, we want 30,000 square meters, in a design. And then we show the image, this is 30,000 square meters. Do you want that? And then in many cases, no, that's much too dense, and so on. And then Okay, but it's representing what you've been deciding on the level of an Excel table. So it's a very simple example of how design, our tool, can help to clarify things, to block projects, or to push projects forward. That design and research by design should be part of the game, part of the policy on urban quality. The last thing is a rather classical thing. So we, as a team, we organize discussions on projects. And so in Belgium, or in Brussels, to be more specific, every building permit above 5,000 square meters has to get an advice on the quality by the bouwmeester. And so it's a leverage also to have private developers around the table, because they know you will give an advice. So for them, it's better to come earlier and to discuss in the hope that they think that they can influence my advice, but I take the opportunity in order to improve the project. So I think it's really crucial also in governance, if you're working on quality, that you are there very much in the beginning. The more ahead, the better, because it's much more easy in the beginning to change a project, to improve a project, than on the moment of the building permit. Because if you want to have things changed then, everyone gets angry. So the architect is angry because he has been drawing a lot. The developer is angry because he has been paying a lot. And I'm also angry because I've not been involved before. So a clue for good design governance is to organize collaboration from the very beginning. Then some words on Brussels, very shortly, and then I would like to develop some ideas that are very much being discussed today in Brussels. So this is Brussels. Perhaps you know it, perhaps some people went visiting one of the European institutions. You can see a lot of things here. One should say that it's not very beautiful, isn't it? It's a bit of everything. It's a hodgepodge. So Brussels clearly is not an acute city. It's not a harmonious city. It's not like Bruges, or it's not like Vienna. So it's a bit of everything. It's there. It's due to the fact that in the 1960s there was, you could say, wild capitalism. There were a lot of Belgian developers demolishing entire neighborhoods and so on. So it's the result of a bad policy. On the other hand, it's there, so we won't change it anymore. That's why I prefer now to look at it in another way. And that's why it's important that you know also this about Brussels. So this is about the population of Brussels. So it's a growing city, many young people, many people coming from elsewhere due to immigration. So today in Brussels, 1 of 3 people living in Brussels is not Belgian, has no Belgian identity card. So part of it is rich, is the European expats. Part of it is very poor, is an immigrant, recent immigrant coming from elsewhere and not having yet the Belgian nationality. And so the majority in Brussels, 2 of 3 people in Brussels, was not born in Belgium or has one parent that was not born in Belgium. So it's coming from elsewhere. So that means only 1 of 3 people in my city is like me, the child of 2 Belgian parents. So I'm a minority in my city. I'm becoming the exception. So that's really important for us in Brussels, that we have to change our perspective. So that perhaps what is typical of Brussels, what is the really Brussels guy, is someone who's not from Brussels, who arrived in Brussels, who came in Brussels, who has chosen to live in Brussels. So, and that's what brings us together. All of us in Brussels have chosen for Brussels, independent of our origin. I think so Brussels is the most diverse city in Europe. I think this is also the future of the European city, everywhere. So that we should adapt to this kind of constellation. And that's why I think now that this cityscape is really something for Brussels, because it's like a mirror of the society. It's reflecting the composition and the very diverse composition of the city of Brussels. So you could say it's very much, it suits us. That's really us, a bit of everything. A lot of things are possible, not one style, not one dominant style. So it's also very liberating for the trauma of what has been done wrong in the 1960s, to accept it now and to see it as a kind of opportunity. Also, my parents, they know how Brussels has been demolished, partly. I know parts of it. I'm a kind of intermediate generation. But my daughter is 20 years, and she loves this city. She doesn't mourn about what has been lost. She really likes this kind of diversity in the cityscape. So it's very liberating to see a city like this. Then I've prepared you in the connection with the topic of today, green challenges, 3 or 4 aspects that are being discussed in Brussels now or presented, so very not yet finished, so we are also trying, we don't know exactly how to do, and so on. But we know that things are shifting, that the world is changing, so that we have to adapt. Because you could say, of course, there is the urgency of the climate crisis. So if we want to change, if not now, then when? And for us in Belgium, there was a kind of wake-up call last summer, 21, when in the midst of the summer, there was a kind of huge rainfall in Wallonia, a water bomb, floodings everywhere in small cities. 39 people died because of a natural disaster in our country, where normally we don't have natural disasters. We just have always a bit of rain, but never this kind of awful things. So it was kind of a wake-up call. And it helped many people to accept that change is necessary, that we are living in times of a paradigm shift. Also in our jobs, I think I'm witnessing it, I'm living it. I know that I'm working now completely different than 10 years ago, and it took me some time, and it takes me time every day to accept and to act in that way. But I also think that it's extremely, not only necessary, but also extremely interesting, in fact, that things are changing. Indeed, you can't trust the future anymore. There was a time that we knew how the future would be. And today, that is lost. There is uncertainty. But that uncertainty, in the same way as a diversity perhaps, is challenging, it's difficult, it's not always easy, but it's interesting, I think so. For instance, one example. First one really on the regional level. This is the kind of map of Brussels that I used 5 years ago. It's about the density. So red is where there is a lot of density, a lot of built-up area. Blue is where there is still many possibilities. So city is something like 1.2 million inhabitants. And in those days, the map was used to look for where will we build more? Where will we add some housing? Density was high there, but you could still do a lot of things here. And now we use this kind of map. It's the heat island map. So where in the summer is it too warm in the city? And of course, all of you know, professionals know, in fact, it's the same map. You have more heat island effects where you have more building, less green space, more mineral surfaces, more warming up, not cooling down during the night, and so on. It's the same structure, but it's another kind of a perspective and an interpretation. And today, that is being discussed. Not anymore where can we still build here, but how can we de-densify there? How can we get more blue in the red? So that means in Brussels, the last decade, it was urbanism, the discourse were dominated by the number of 10,000. That was 10,000 new inhabitants each year. So how to provide housing, how to densify. Now we are moving, and that's exactly the paradigm shift that is happening, from 10,000 to the number of 2, and 2 is the warming up of the planet, in our part of the planet. That could be expected, and that we hope won't be the case, but that will be probably the case, especially after the Sharm el-Sheikh decisions. So that means this is the shift that is happening in our minds, in the mentality of urban planners and architects. So what is being done today in Brussels? Brussels is a car-dominated city with a lot of infrastructure, tunnels and roads and viaducts, also dating from the 1960s. So a lot of infrastructure, and still it's congested. So if you add some roads, okay, it works, and after 2 years, so that road is saturated as well. So there is a plan that is called Good Move. That is a plan for the entire region that wants to do something else on the actual situation, which you could call no move. Many roads, but no move. And so the new plan wants to get rid of transit traffic through the neighborhoods. That's one thing. So the city will be cut up in neighborhoods and where you can't go through. And also that has already been approved in the entire city, so 1.2 million inhabitants. The maximum speed is 30 kilometers per hour. So it's already since more than 1 year now, and you really can feel it in the city. There is a kind of apaisement. City is becoming more calm. The new plan for cutting transit traffic through the neighborhoods is leading to a lot of discussion, also aggression. So there is today a lot of polarization in Brussels between people who love their cars and that are demolishing all the kind of temporary traffic signs and so on. So it's not something that has settled. And it shows very much how this paradigm shift is very present in daily life. Because it's, of course, difficult to change your habits. We all know that. I know that. I have difficulty to change my habits as well. Another level, more on architecture. I made you a kind of, you could say, buffet of several things. One is very regional, then about architecture, then also about something about participation and civil society. So in Brussels, we have a lot of office buildings, thanks to the European institutions. And for many, many years, the idea was when the office building is outdated, it's not fancy anymore, or the ceiling height is not anymore answering the new regulations and new standards and so on. So private developers decided to tear down the building and to build a new building. That is, of course, on the level of sustainability, a stupid thing, because you produce a lot of new energy to construct the building and to produce new materials. But there is also the embedded energy, the energy that is in the building, existing building, that is spoiled. The energy that was once necessary to build it, that is spoiled. That's why we are trying to develop a new policy in Brussels, general policy of adaptive reuse, that buildings should be reused, that at least the concrete structure should be reused. And it brings also a new kind of cultural dimension, another kind of architecture. So a lot of pioneering work was done by Moderaator, which is a small Brussels agency that has been working for more than 20 years now on the reuse of materials. And also developing a kind of new aesthetics, so that the piece of marble that is perhaps a bit scratched or not new, that it's also beautiful because of that reason. And also because you know that this marble, for instance, comes from the North Station, so there is a history about it. So what Moderaator has been doing is going to building sites, having a contract with the owner, and then removing, dismantling some materials and selling them on the market, on a kind of online market, to, in the beginning, mostly architects and interior designers, but more and more also all kinds of people. It's a bit cherry picking, because they take the best parts of the building, of course. In fact, it's not new. You could say it's a tradition that we have lost. Now we are used to always use new materials, and we go to China and Bangladesh and India in order to import natural stone. Well, even this is a photograph from the 1930s in Brussels. So a historical building that was from earlier times, the Palais Granvelle, was to be demolished. And you can see that they prepare the demolition by sorting out all kinds of types of materials. So they are making a kind of recycling, triage, already done. But then the interesting part is also that, but probably you can't read, there is this small sign here saying façade et matériaux à vendre. So facade materials for sale. So the facade itself was for sale. So the idea was not to demolish it, but to offer it for sale and to reuse it. And so the facade was bought by a small municipality that has been reintegrating it in its new city hall building. And so it's this kind of idea that we want to push forward back on the agenda. So this is a project I can see. I don't know what happened, but all of the credits of the architects have been lost. Okay, no, they are here. They're just because they're in the black border. So this is a build, because I want to be respectful towards the architect. So this is a building by West Architects with the collaboration of Moderaator, the ones who were working with the marble. It's, of course, some 19th century houses in Brussels with a big hangar on the backside. And there will be a kind of cultural association who's making a parade each year. The idea was to, of course, to keep the building and also to develop a new kind of architecture that is integrating old and new elements. So very visible in the staircase over there, where you have both at the same time, but also in the back facade of the building. And so these architects develop, again, a kind of cultural dimension of sustainable architecture. So sustainable architecture is not just about emissions, it's also about good architecture, about this public aspect of good architecture. And that's why the public administration has to adapt as well. Because the nice story is, you see the window that is curved. Well, in the building permit, they knew that they wanted to have a window over there, but they didn't know exactly which kind of window, because it's a window that is reused, and so it depends on availability of the window. And the building permit is something like 1 year before the building site, so you don't know yet which kind of window you will find. So this is historical. It's the first building permit in Brussels with a dotted line, where it was indicated, in this zone, there will be a window. Because normally the building permit administration wants, of course, precise information. And so, of course, they made a joke of it. They find a window, which is normally the other way. The curve is on the upper side. And then they, okay, we'll go wild. We'll turn it upside down to challenge the public administration. Because we have our ability, we can do what we want within the limits of the dotted line. Then, so cultural project, the first one. So this kind of client was into the ID. Second project is a school, also special thing, because we have to make schools very quickly, because we have a need, we don't have time to make new buildings. So there was an old office building, concrete cast structure or prefab structure from the 1960s, considered to be an ugly building, banal building. Well, it has been reused as a school. So we organized a competition with the Bouwmeester team. They've been adding a staircase in wood so that it's perfectly circular on the outside. But then what was the strength of Agua, the architects here, that they said, okay, we will not just reuse the outer shell of the building, we will reuse all of this kind of partition walls of a typical standard office floor. And so they made a huge inventory, a lot of bookmakers' work. Which kind of panels do we have? And they restructured it in order to make classrooms in the building. And so that's why you have now in the classrooms these kind of existing panels, and then what they've been adding is in plywood, visible plywood. One could say, again, it doesn't look neat. It's not smooth architecture, but it's another kind of aesthetics that is being developed now. And the building works very well. Next example, and now it's about mainstreaming. Okay, competitions for a cultural client, for a school, public school, these special circumstances. This is a mainstream real estate development in Brussels. So an office tower in the center of Brussels is refurbished. Of course, it was in the 1960s, it was a brutal error to build this building there, to make a high building so it's 200 meters of the Grand Place in the medieval part of the city. But it's there. Let's try to embrace it, and let's try to make it better, and let's accept it. So the private developer really wanted to go to work in a circular way, and that's why the most important part, effect of the project, is again a kind of inventory of all materials, existing materials, how they can be reused on site, also existing materials but coming from elsewhere, so like the hexagonal tiles, they're very beautiful tiles made by, in Belgium, a famous designer from a bank headquarters, so being put here, but also materials that from this building go to another building. So for instance, the ventilation system of this building that was on top of it, huge machine, but not enough modern for the future use of this building. So the ventilation system has been sold to Zinneke, the first project that you saw with the window that was upside down, and is being reused over there. So in Brussels, the idea is that you would have a kind of continuously internal market of moving materials and reusing them, perhaps in the same buildings, sometimes in another building. And that's why this is my last example in this series. This is in the heart of the European district. So when we are talking about, my ambition is to mainstream this idea of circular construction and reuse of buildings. And that's why it's important that there is also a project in the heart of the problem, where there was this habit of always demolishing buildings. So the first idea of the developer was to demolish this office building and to build a new office building with higher floors and so on. We convinced them not to do that. together with all the public authorities. We say no. And then we organize the competition. So the facade is kept, is cleaned, is insulated from the inside. There is a new heating system and so on. But the main intervention of the architects is not very visible, but extremely important. Because on each floor, you had huge cores with staircases and so on the wrong place, and also very thick concrete columns, so that the floor was not open and airy like they wanted now in office spaces. And so the architects, they preserve the building, but they add a huge truss on top of it. And then, step by step, they replace the cores and also the big columns by steel trackers, cables, thick cables, that keep up the floors. So the floors are kept, but the columns are replaced by steel cables that are attached to the truss. So that means that on the inside, the building changes completely. It becomes an open, clean floor. And on -1, because there are no columns anymore, bearing columns going to the foundations on that spot, they add a huge conference, a big hall for conferences and congresses. And so it's an update of the building, it's architecture, it's creativity, it's invention. You need to organize a competition to have this kind of idea, but it's not about the color of the facade or the proportion. So it's about a new kind of aesthetics in architecture that is about something else, that is also not about the style of the architect, the personal style. If you are interested in these kind of adaptive reuse building projects in Belgium, you don't have opportunity to put your mark on it, to have your style. You have to be intelligent, you have to be contextual, you have to understand the building and to do something with it. It's a loss up to a certain level, but it's also something else that comes into place. Last thing, because I have something like 5 minutes, 10 minutes, or not? 5 minutes? 10 minutes. Okay. Well, I'll speak slower then. New agents. So, of course, a city today is not made anymore just by the king or the mayor or the government or the bouwmeester or a public authority and so on. We know, especially in Brussels, that there are also a lot of private market that is making the city. But more and more, and we have to accept that as well, you have also new actors, new agents in city development, and those are citizens. So in Brussels, we have a lot of associations of citizens who are sometimes against something, but also in many cases, they are in favor of something. They want better school environments. They want more pure air. They are not just against a tram in my street. So it's not NIMBY, not in my backyard. It's something that is more general and for the entire city. In many cases, they are architects, or they are into profession, or they are lawyers. So that could be a criticism. It's mostly highly educated people. Some people of my team have a kind of shadow job in some of these associations. And so we have to accept that there is this new kind of constellation, because what they are proposing often is right and is well argued and is professional. So in city development, it's not just anymore the professionals of the public government who are deciding or should be deciding, but we should try to integrate these kind of knowledge and savoir-faire in our system. That's not easy, because public authority has another tradition, and it goes, in many cases, also very slowly, especially in Brussels. So this is the Mont des Arts. It's a major central area with a museum and a library and so on. that just next to between the lower city and the upper city. And there is this kind of memorial plate that says, the Mont des Arts, conceived by King Leopold II, that's 19th century. Mise en œuvre, so started under Leopold III, so that's the one after Leopold II, sorry, okay. Then built under Baudouin I, that's the next one. And then that's, in fact, a kind of, to make it really ironical, and dedicated to the memory of Albert I. That's another one. So it takes 4 kings to build this urban project. So that means that our traditional system doesn't work because it takes too much time. It's ridiculous. And then you have this kind of project in Brussels, along the canal. So we don't have an open-air swimming pool in Brussels. So you can think, okay, well, is that important? Well, it is important because for many youngsters living in Brussels who don't have the money to go to Spain, Italy, or the Belgian coast, so in the summer, especially in warm summers, you need this kind of swimming pool as a kind of escape. And so there is a group of people, a citizens association, that makes the plea to organize a swimming pool in Brussels. So they want public governments to invest money in a public swimming pool, open-air swimming pool. The association is called Pool is Cool. And after so many years of activism, they say, well, now it's enough, we will build our pool ourselves. So they did some crowdfunding, and they started building a pool, of course a small pool, along the canal. It looks like this now, and it has been a huge success. So the only open-air public swimming pool in Brussels is existing now, but not thanks to public authority, but thanks to citizens' initiatives. That should make us, me, modest. And that's also perhaps something that we should learn, that perhaps public authority should try to collaborate more with this kind of professionals and these kind of people who are willing to invest in the city. Another example, so this is Filter Café, an association of young parents who are protesting against the fact that in streets where there is a school, in the morning there are a lot of cars, and so the emissions are even worse in that street on the moment that all the children are outside in the street and want to enter the street. So why don't you close off the street at certain hours of the day, in the morning and around 4 o'clock when schools are finished, so that the air is cleaner and that the traffic is calm and there is more security and so on. So a lot of protestations, and in the end, they've won, because now in the traffic regulations, we have a new traffic sign that says School Street. And so that means in certain hours, the school is closed, and all of the people know now. So it's a kind of victory again of those people. So that made us think, us or the government. And so now during, of course, COVID times, there were a lot of initiatives and so on, we turned it the opposite way. Okay, we said, we have some money to organize summer events in the city, staycation in the city, because we can't go elsewhere. But we know that you have better ideas probably than we, so we will not organize, we will offer you the money, and we organize a kind of call and a competition to select projects and so on. And so it happened in the summer of 2020 and 2021 as well. And so there were wonderful initiatives of streets that were closed down and organizing activities for the children and so on, painting the streets so that it would be clear that this is a summer street and so on. So it's an example. So we learned in some way that we have to provide a framework, to provide investment, but provide subsidies, but that we don't have to do everything ourselves, that we can trust associations in order to do it and to take over the city. So I like very much this idea that you have a kind of going up and down between top-down and bottom-up. I don't believe in top-down. Who does? Only in China it's still top-down. But I don't believe either in exclusively bottom-up. I believe in public interest. I think a government should deal about public interest, should set lines and so on. And so the system that was developed here is a kind of example of perhaps a new kind of governance that is combining top-down and bottom-up, each one with its own roles, each one with its own responsibilities. The very last thing is about this kind of slogan. It's I'm teaching also at university in Ghent for architects. And so it's at my university, it's an artist said the next big thing will be a lot of small things. For me, it's an important slogan because indeed in a city you need strategic projects, you need important things, but you shouldn't neglect the small things. Also because if you have many small things, the city is changing as well. So both levels are important. And so that's why with the Bouwmeester team, we don't despise, perhaps it's better to hear, to work on regulations, building codes, dull stuff. So not fine competitions and big strategic projects, but also the very basic, stupid, annoying regulations. I think they are also important to change a city. And so in Brussels now, the government is working on a reform of the building code, so the regulations that will apply to all building permits. You know, this kind of thing, so the building can't be 3 meters higher than the building next to it and so on. But it's an opportunity to have a lot of new regulations that go for the paradigm shifts, that go for fighting heat island effects, that go for greening the city, and that go for improving the quality of life of people. So for instance, in the proposal now, and so that's very drastic, in fact, the idea is that for all streets, all public space, maximum 50% of the space can be dedicated to car traffic. So 50% has to be reserved for something else. That means public transport or cycling paths, pedestrians, green space, and so on. Also, in all streets, 10% of the total surface area should be for trees and also for plant air, so full ground, true ground, so where water can infiltrate. Each building plot, 30%, especially in the city center, should remain unbuilt, and of that area of 30%, 75% should be again full soil, true soil, where trees can grow and where the water can infiltrate. So I know, of course, so this is revolution in Brussels, car-dominated Brussels. I know, of course, that there will, in many cases, it won't be possible to do it because there is no space enough, because we know that today we still have too much cars and we can't compress them in that way. But what is important is that you set up an ambition. It's better to fly high, to have a high ambition, and then to make derogations or deviations that perhaps are a kind of concession. But then you're changing the mechanism, you're changing the standard. So the standard is this. And so that's where we go for. Of course, we know that it won't be always possible, but this is where we go for. Same thing, of course, for the reuse of buildings. I know that, of course, buildings will still be demolished in Brussels. So it's normal, and it's also sometimes very much needed. But the mechanism, the automatism, the reflex has to be changed and turned upside down. I think that is the paradigm shift. Some last two elements, some of the elements are also dealing with the quality of life of people. So these are the lessons learned from the COVID pandemic, of course. So in Brussels, it was not the case. I don't know how it is in your city, but Now, for each dwelling, a an exterior space, or a balcony or a terrace, will be obligatory. Minimum 4 square meters and 2 square meters, so we say 2 square meters per pillow in the apartment. And also, apartments from more than 1 bedroom should have windows in at least two directions. So they can't be mono-oriented. So they should be on the corner, or they should be transversal, so that you have daylight conditions on both sides and different daylight conditions. So that for instance, you're not only oriented towards the north. So again, small rules, but if you multiply them, they are very important in improving the quality of life in the city. And also, if you think on the long term, it's important to change the standards. So that's the kind of paradigm shift that we are trying to develop now in Brussels. Thank you.